Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Brian Curran. Brian Curran represents the 21st Assembly District in New York State. The 21st District includes parts of Nassau County. We thank you folks on Long Island for joining us, and Brian Curran, nice to see you.
It's great to see you too, Michael.
We are knee-deep here in the month of March in budget talks at the state capitol. That's about expected. I think we've just about hit that just right.
Well, you know what? We had a couple delays in the early part of the session with, obviously the passing of former Governor Mario Cuomo, but also then the change in the speakership in the Assembly kind of delayed the budget process for about a week or two. But yes, we're knee-deep in it, as you said.
Back on track, I guess time will tell. We'll see whether or not this is going to be the fifth on-time budget in a row here at the state capitol. Governor Cuomo has been making a lot of hay with that his first 4 years here in Albany. But this year there seems to be a bit of a change. The governor's playing a bit more hardball with the state legislature on a number of issues. Why don't we get into some of that today?
Well, I have to tell you, Michael, the biggest change this year is the fact that when I came up in 2010, there was a $10 billion budget deficit, and every year since then, we've always started the budget process without money. There's never been a year where we've actually had a budget surplus. This year, for a variety of reasons which we're going to get into, they have plenty of money here in Albany. And what I've been told is the budget process usually goes a lot smoother when there is no money, because there's nothing to fight about if there's no money, and that's the way it's been in the past 4 years. This year, there's too much money, and I believe that that's going to delay the process and may jeopardize that 4-year streak of actually having on-time budgets.
We start off with a $5 billion, I don't want to call it a surplus, but $5 billion that the state wouldn't normally have as a result of legal settlements, different things that courts have decided, you know what, state of New York, you were wronged on this, so here's $5 billion. But the problem with that kind of money is you're not going to get it again next year.
Exactly, Michael, and that's what I'm trying to make sure that everybody understands. This is a windfall for the state. It arises out of a legal settlement that the state had with regards to financial institutions arising from the mortgage crisis. And the exact amount of that legal settlement is actually $5.68 billion, which out of that money's $5.4 billion of it is available to the state to spend this year. Now, the governor has come out and said that he would like to see the majority of that money being spent on infrastructure projects, which is a great thing, because I am a true believer. As a former mayor of Lynbrook, I'm a true believer that if you're going to have a one-time revenue shot, which this is, because we're never going to see this money again except for this year, you better spend it on a one-time expense, because if you put it into reoccurring expenses, next year you're going to be scrounging around trying to find money to fill that hole. And on that, he has actually recommended various infrastructure projects throughout the state, which are great projects. However, there is one project that I am pushing locally, which is the best infrastructure project that could help and benefit the entire South Shore, and that is the East Rockaway Bay Park Sewerage Plant outflow pipe, which would take sewerage out from Reynolds Channel into the ocean. There is a substantial cost to that, but it is a drop in the bucket compared to having $5.4 billion. So I am asking the governor and the state legislature to fund that project so that we can finally get an outflow pipe for the Bay Park Sewerage Program park. And I think that's one of the big issues facing us this year.
One of the concerns I've heard from representatives of Long Island and upstate New York is that maybe all of that, or a large chunk of that $5.68 billion might end up going towards that Tappan Zee Bridge project, that huge project that the governor's been touting for the past several years. And it would make sense on the one hand that he would want that to happen. But what I'm hearing is you can't forget the rest of the state. I mean, there's a lot of these types of projects that are out there that have been waiting for a very long time for just such an opportunity.
And Mike, you're absolutely right, because within the governor's proposed budget, Nassau and Suffolk County, Long Island as a whole, gets shortchanged with regards to this settlement money. Again, $5.4 billion. Only 3% currently under the governor's budget is allocated for projects within Nassau and Suffolk County. That's unacceptable. We have to look at Tappan Zee Bridge as a fantastic project that will benefit the state as a whole. However, also within that spending of $5.4 billion is a $1.5 billion competition grant for counties upstate that Nassau County can't even apply for. He's going to hand out 3 competition grants for 3 counties upstate, $500 million for each grant. Nassau County can't even apply for that. That's patently unfair, and we can't allow that to happen. Nassau and Suffolk deserve its fair share of that $5.4 billion, and we're going to fight to get it.
So that's one of the budget stories that's playing out here at the state capitol this year. But there's a number of others. I mentioned earlier on the governor playing hardball with the legislature this year. He's changed his tactics up a little bit in terms of saying that, you know, if I don't get my way on this, this isn't going to happen, and that's not going to happen. And if you don't fund this, that's not going to get funded. He's tied a lot of projects and spending together, I guess, to try to force the legislature's hands on some things that are near and dear to him.
Sure. You know, he's had tendencies in the past, and one of the tendencies in the 4 years is to actually take a bulk of money and put it on the side and use it as leverage during the negotiations, budget negotiations with both the Senate and the Assembly. But the other tendency that he has had is to link both monetary and fiscal issues together with legislative issues, and that's wrong. He uses the budget to actually pass legislation, and this year is no different. What he's been doing is, with regards to education, which you know on Nassau County is the primary concern of every representative going into the budget negotiations. What he has recommended a $1.1 billion increase in state aid, which from the start is a good thing. But on the budget side, we are projecting a $525 million surplus. It's on the budget side, forgetting about the legal settlement. And with regards to that, the $1.1 billion is short. We should be increasing that significantly to catch up on previous years where we have cut education. Particularly, we can help Nassau and Suffolk schools by doing away with the GEA, which you know is a gap elimination adjustment. But getting back to linkage, what he has done is he has said that $1.1 billion increase, the kids will never see that increase unless the legislature passes a 4-point educational reform package. And the educational reform package has to do exclusively with teacher evaluations, teacher tenure. And the point of this is, regardless of if his educational reform package is good or bad, which I believe is there are several points that are misguided, it should go through the normal legislative process of debate and analysis by both the Senate and Assembly and not as part of the budget. But he is saying that the kids will never see that increase unless we pass that reform package.
The one thing I think you could pretty much guarantee is that almost any member of the legislature will say to you that, yeah, we need to look at teacher evaluations. Yeah, we need to figure out why some schools in this state are underperforming so badly. But the other thing I can guarantee you is that there's a lot of differing opinions as to how to go about achieving that. And that's, I guess, what is suspect about the governor's intent here, is that it's got to be his way of doing it. He's really trying to jam this, it seems, down the legislature's throat.
He is, and as a person and as one of the very few people who voted against his original teacher evaluation proposal, which was APPR, I voted against it because it was a flawed system. It actually hurt teachers, parents, and students most of all. And what he's trying to do on one of these proposals is double down on that by increasing the percentages of the evaluations. And we have to look further into it, but the way he's going about it is wrong. But if I may, Mike, another linkage with regards to the educational field is his insistence on tying pieces of legislation together that are popular and that with legislation that's unpopular. One example in this budget is the Educational Tax Investment Credit, which has over 107 Assembly sponsors on it. It is a tax credit to allow for both public and private school private donations. He is saying that he will allow the passage of that bill and being signed into law if the DREAM Act, and the DREAM Act is another piece of legislation that is a hot button, legislation that was actually taken up by the Assembly last week, which would allow college tuition assistance for undocumented residents here in New York State. And many of us oppose that because of a variety of reasons. But to link the two of them and then to link it with the passage of an increase in TAP monies it's unacceptable by the governor. It's hardball.
Right. So what he's saying here is that you've got to pass the DREAM Act, send it to me for my signature, or else you're not going to be able to get this other thing that the majority of the legislature wants. that's defeating the entire democratic process here in Albany. The idea of separate two houses in the legislature, a power, or rather a balance of power between the executive and the legislative.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about the DREAM Act, because it is a hot button issue here, and it is one that gets debated. It got debated a couple times just last year alone in the New York State Assembly, already again this year. You spoke on it, and you talked about your reservations about it. Why don't we take a look at that now and see what some of those reservations are? Then we'll come back and we'll finish up today's edition of Assembly Calendar.
Every single year we hear this debate, and there are a variety of issues that are raised, but one issue that I'm always interested in hearing is how everybody gets up and state that there is no fiscal risk to the people who are currently receiving TAP. And that's just not true. I mean, our history here in the state has shown on at least 2 occasions in the last 20 years where we have decided to decrease the maximum awards because we have run into fiscal problems within the state. And that is not out of the realm of possibility of doing it again. And if that becomes such a problem where we don't even entertain reducing the maximum award, but rather actually reducing the income eligibility rates, that's going to disqualify many middle-class families within my district and everybody else's district, regardless of if you're white, black, Spanish, Asian, doesn't matter. It's going to disqualify a lot of people who are currently on the bubble for TAP funding. So I wanted to point that out, and because of those concerns, those fiscal concerns, despite everybody's belief that there are no possible future ramifications to expanding this pool, I would encourage everybody to actually take a second look at this bill and for now vote no against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As we said, I mean, there's a lot of differences of opinion on something like the DREAM Act and the giving of state resources to undocumented people in the state, residents of the state. But to tie it and say, well, if you don't do this, well, then you're not going to have the TAP program. You're not going to have these other educational opportunities for the children of residents of the state who've been here for a long time and are contributing.
And Mike, you know, the thing about this is the DREAM Act is one way of going about solving a problem, which I believe, listen, regardless of if you're documented or undocumented, the path to success in this country has always been education. We can't shut education off for anybody, regardless. If you're here, you deserve a good education. But the way to go about that is different from the DREAM Act. Is something that we did 2 years ago, and that's create a DREAM Fund, where it's privately funded through private donations and not governmental money that jeopardizes documented middle-class kids in my district from getting tossed out of the TAP because we're expanding the pool so much.
There seems to be sometimes that disconnect here at the state legislature as to that these are tax dollars.
Sure.
And what is the appropriate use of tax dollars and the will of the people and the role of government, I guess. Sometimes it seems to me the legislature here is like, well, we've got tax dollars, it's a single pool of money, let's do something fun with it.
What is, and I hope I drove this point home, is what was scary about that debate every single year is that people get up on that floor and they say, well, listen, it is an unending pie of money for the TAP program, and that is just not true. There is always coming a point, and we've seen it in the first year that I was up here, that pie sometimes is a lot smaller than in other years. And if we're in a financial hole, then we're going to have to reduce that pie, and it's middle-class families in my district that is going to get hurt, and I can't allow that.
Yeah, that's just we just scratched the surface today, folks. We're already out of time. There's a lot of interesting scenarios taking place behind the scenes here as these budget talks go on at the state capitol, some of them behind the scenes, some of them in front of the curtain, and we're going to be sure to bring them to you as we meet up with Brian Curran over the next several weeks. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to your representative, easy thing to do. You can contact Brian Curran at his office in Lynbrook, dial 561-8216, or send an email to curranb@assembly.state.ny.us. And as we thank Brian Curran for joining us here today, we want to thank you folks too, and we'll hope to see you all soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.